Hello there, this is Gary DiBianca, and we're going to start keeping CI simple for students. So welcome to this Teachers Discovery Voces Digital webinar. So keeping CI or comprehensible input simple for students, this is what I'll be talking about today. While teaching with comprehensible input can be overwhelming for teachers, it could be even more overwhelming for students. When working with novice and intermediate learners who are not accustomed to target language teaching, we must scaffold the learning experiences so students can follow along and build the stamina needed for staying engaged during a class. This webinar will present various ideas and strategies for using simple stories and context to add in language acquisition. So who am I? I'm Gary DiBianca. I teach in Northeast Ohio in Pepper Pike. My website is garydibianca.com with a lot of the resources from today, and follow me on Twitter or ask me questions there. You could also ask me questions during this webinar on Facebook. I'll be checking in with those. Oh yeah, I teach Spanish 1 through 4, and so what I've done is I've devised and taken this topic into 6 different aspects of teaching and lesson planning with comprehensible input. So each one of these will be a segment today. So keeping CI simple for students by training yourself and your students, by chunking language, by timing your lessons, by reusing language, reading language, and assessing language. So training yourself and your students. First of all, I want to start off by talking about what is comprehensible input. And so it's language that can be comprehended by students. And when we talk about it in the context of our classrooms, the belief in comprehension-based or acquisition-driven classroom environments is that with repetitive, comprehensible input from a teacher, students can acquire a second language that leads to proficiency in that second language. So I want to compare 2 different thoughts of learning language. First of all, legacy learning of a second language. Traditional language classrooms generally would focus on what the student is doing or not doing to learn or memorize language. It focused on learning pieces and parts and putting them together almost like mathematics. Students may practice some communication in the classroom, but often are doing grammar drills, and there's a focus on teaching grammar. Oftentimes, memorization equals short-term memory. This was always a struggle for me when I was teaching in a different way, that my students would get A+ on every vocabulary quiz, and when I asked them a week or 2 later for those words, they could not say them, they could not use them, they could not remember them. And this other philosophy of, oh yeah, you'll learn how to communicate when you go abroad. And I know that's how many of us teachers, current teachers, learned a language, and we learned when we did go abroad, and it took us a couple months. That's more legacy teaching. So acquiring a second language, this is what I feel we can do in our classrooms. We can focus on taking advantage of the brain's ability to acquire language. We are all able to acquire language. We all acquired our first language. And what can I do in my classroom to activate the same parts of the brain and help students acquire their second language? Acquired language that is contextualized oftentimes goes into long-term memory. Again, can't be just teaching my students to learn something and forget it, because it's not helping their overall proficiency. So what can I do for long-term memory? And with acquisition, grammar and structure is developed and discussed when appropriate and meaningful. I am not going to say that in my acquisition-driven classroom, there is not grammar and structure. It is always embedded, but I talk about it when it's appropriate and meaningful to students. So setting up your community. These are 4 aspects I'd like you to remember. Create a safe environment so students have a low affective filter so that their stress is not causing them the inability to learn or acquire language. Talk with your students about acquisition and the philosophies that I've started to talk about here. And of course, you can do much research on this to find out more. Let them know why you are teaching this way. It's going to be very different for some students who have maybe tried to learn a language in the past. Set the tone of the class. What are your expectations? And demand them with care. So when I sit back and look at what I do in the classroom, I am demanding my expectations, but there's always that sense of me and caring in the room. And that's something we build as teachers. We know when we can joke around with students, when we shouldn't joke around with students. So I'm developing that class culture. Show students you care about them and their success. Make them have success. It's a really big part of what I'm going to talk about today, especially when you're starting with novices. We want our students to be successful. I really don't want them to have these terrible moments of, well, if you would have studied, you'd be doing better. That's not the class culture I want to create. So are you losing your students or are you winning them over? You know, when we talk in the target language, it may sound blah, 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 blah to so many students. And honestly, when I work with teenagers, and I'm a high school teacher, but this is the same for our middle school students or any college students, if they just hear blah, 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 they are a lost teenager. They are lost and then they become angry. They feel, I can't understand this. I don't understand the target language you're speaking, and I cannot do this. We don't want this to be their experience because we want to win them over. So how to keep language comprehended. Students must show you when they are understanding language and when they do not understand language. So I have a class gesture that my students all use when they don't understand something. Your students are not going to want to do this. This is not comfortable for them, but it takes training. And I constantly am telling them, look, I need you to let me know that you're not understanding, because if I just think you're understanding, I'm going to continue with my target language. So it takes training and working with your students. To aid in comprehension, teachers should also use pre-taught gestures, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. Point to English words using word walls. That's my classroom right now. I have a lot of word walls going on. I teach Spanish 1 and 4 this year. So certain colors mean certain things, like my level 4s are mostly the white words, and then my colorful words are more for my Spanish 1s. Not that those colorful words are not also aiding my other Spanish 4 students. So I know it looks like there's a lot going on there, and there is, but I need my students to start paying attention and focusing to where these words are in the room, so they always have them to help themselves while I'm speaking language or they're doing a reading, for example. Quickly state something in English. If students are confused, I can quickly say one word in English, it clarifies it, and I move on. Use visuals, absolutely. If you have lots of visuals, you can draw, props and costumes. If you see under the whiteboard or that electronic board in my room, those are all of my props. I got these fantastic baskets at Home Depot last year. So this year I'm able to have a lot more of my props out instead of in bins. And I'm able to use those to help students understand my spoken language. So a teacher's attitude. These are 10 recommendations and 10 things to remember for keeping it simple and creating that culture. You have to be a cheerleader for your students. We want them to be successful. You have to stay positive. regardless of how the class is acting. I have some classes that it is challenging. It is challenging to go in and work daily, but I have to stay positive, because if I stay positive and I insist that they can do it, I know that's helping the overall class culture. Demand students uphold the expectations while showing them you care about them and their success. I know I've said that. I keep saying it. Again, even for those challenging classes. Celebrate their successes. Remember, acquisition takes time. I often have to remind myself, especially working with novices, it takes time. Remember, an apathetic looking teenager does not mean they are not learning or not enjoying class. Some kids that just give you that stare the whole period, you find out they love your class and it's their favorite one of the day. Remember how hard listening to target language is for students. Remember when you struggled with your target language. Remember when you were abroad and you were hearing target language for 10 hours a day, how you felt early on. We have to remember this is how our students feel. Do exit slips or routine formative assessments to see what students are acquiring. Continue to learn more about teaching with comprehensible input without thinking you must implement every idea that you see or read, or that you have to be a superstar teacher. This is important. I'm always reading someone's blog or another book or going to another conference. I know that I can't do it all. And I'm letting you know you can't do it all either. And if you keep things simple, you can still be a really successful and great teacher. Give yourself time to grow into this type of teaching, and give your students time to grow. This is year 12 for me doing CI, and I'm still learning. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm still doing all of this simple work. The next one is chunking language. So chunking and scaffolding our language, I think about it in these different 4 ways of chunking. We should be working with students at a word level, then a word pair, word with prepositions, and then a sentence, the sentence level. I'll give you some examples. The word level is runs quickly, runs with his dog. John runs with his dog. John runs quickly to Target. Those are 2 sentences that is just building from these. So I feel I am saying chunking language is going to be a really nice way to keep it simple for students. And then you're able to think in these 4 different modes. This one is adding a little bit of culture. So kisses both cheeks. That's my word pair. I know it's not a pair. Touches or kisses both her cheeks with his cheeks. Again, if I'm doing this in the context of the Spanish-speaking world, touching the cheeks or kissing the cheeks, cultural. John kisses both her cheeks, or John touches both her cheeks with his cheeks. Again, I'm able to even build in culture with my structures, and I do want you to think about that. For novices and intermediates, chunking helps you differentiate. So for my first 3 weeks of school, input from me included all 4 of these, but I did not expect output like this from students. So I want to make sure that I'm saying that. Here are some examples when I'm talking about word pairs, about just adding details. You can add colors like orange shoes, size, a big house, quantity, shape, nationality or origin, feelings or emotions like a sad guy. This is where I can do possession, the best, the worst, the material. I can also do this with adverbs, any adverb of ly or well, poorly. Adding prepositions, I start to build these. For my novices, I certainly have not done all of these, but I wanted to show you this. And I do talk about novices and intermediates. If Excuse me, I have one thing. Okay, there we go. With, like, on, in, at, toward, for, in order to, from, or of. You're not adding all of these. And if you're intermediate, you're in a Spanish or a target language 3 or 4 class, and your students are not accustomed to hearing the target language, you need to start small, and you also have to start small with your chunking. So shoes with leopard spots, sings like Beyonce, a book for learning Japanese. These are going to be ways that you can start chunking your language. And I even chunk my language with pauses when I'm speaking. So chunking at the novice and intermediate level, again, I do it at all levels. I don't expect output until my students are ready to produce detailed language. So again, when we start looking at detailed language, that's above and beyond our novice high students. Please don't get me wrong. Some of your novice students are going to be able to do this, and that's fantastic. The goal, by chunking, you're providing richer, contextualized, authentic language for your students throughout the year. And I think it helps you differentiate. Maybe I want most of my students to get that word level, but by differentiating it, some students are going to start thinking in the word pair level. Some students are going to start thinking in the word with a preposition, prepositional phrase, and other students will be starting to think and be able to produce sentence level. What is your students, what is it that they should be able to do with the target language? Well, your novices, interpretive is the most important with our novices, which is reading and listening. I have that as almost 50% of what I'm working with. The interpersonal communication, yeah, a lot less. Presentational communication, a lot less also for my novices. They can do it, but it's not my ultimate goal. But some easy things that they can do that I'll talk about during the assessment section would be simple storytelling. They can do that. Our intermediates, it's a bit different. We're taking our intermediates to interpretive communication that's mixed with presentational communication, that's mixed with interpersonal communication, and them doing all of these things at the same time. So presentational communication, it's messy, but the students are polishing it when they're intermediates. Interpersonal communication, yeah, it's going to be messy, it's going to be spontaneous. And their interpretive communication, how are they able to delve deeper into the listening aspects as well as the reading, what they're reading. Timing your lessons, as I am timing now. This is something I have started doing this year, and I love it. It has been my goal to change activities in my level 1 classes every 10 minutes. I have these simple kitchen timers. I give one to a student, they control it. I say, all right, I need 10 minutes right now. I need 8 minutes. Sometimes, yes, I go over a minute, but the students have a nice feeling about it too, because they know that I'm being timed. What I've set back, I haven't taught level 1 in a few years, and I'm doing it now, and I realized, whoa, so many of these students are 9th and 10th graders, just like my level 2s and my level 3s. Why wasn't I doing more of this before? I think it would have helped. I think it would have helped classroom management. I think it would have helped build the stamina I'm talking about. We need to build the stamina. Today, our students, their attention spans, at least the students I teach, are not that high. They cannot go as long as I would hope, or as long as we kind of get trained to think. Maybe we've done great demos, great TPRS demos or CI, and we have teachers that are instructing us for an hour in the target language. And that's what we want to do. And We can't. Our students cannot handle it. So we need to be timing them, and I'm recommending this. It's been working fantastic. So I've created some sample lesson plans for you. This is a 50-minute lesson, and I do have a 90-minute block one. I teach 50-minute classes 3 times a week, and I teach a block once a week, a 90-minute period with each group of students. So, and I go on to talk about more of these later, and I actually describe them. 10 minutes in sample 1, TPR actions and gestures with my students. Get them walking around the room, doing different things. Tell a simple story. I'm going to talk all about what I mean about a 10-minute simple story. Get them into a reading for 10 minutes. I have a section on reading. Talk about the calendar for 10 minutes, and then a quick quiz. My quiz is a formative assessment that is checking what they've gotten from the day. You know, oh, my prepare for, that is just their homework. You know, there'll be a quiz on Friday. I often give a quiz on Friday that they know about and they may be able to prepare. I'm talking too much because I'm talking about all of this in a little later. Sample 2, talk about the calendar. Song with lyrics. One thing I don't talk too much about today are songs. I do use songs. I love using songs. I use authentic songs from pop artists. I use a lot of Senor Woolley for Spanish teachers, and he just came out with Senor Woolley French, so check that out. That's fantastic for my students, and I use those in all levels. New structures. So if I'm teaching new language or the language chunks that I was talking about, I do some gestures with them or some PQA, personalized questions and answers. Okay, then another 40 minutes, I'm at 40 minutes, or excuse me, at a half hour, then tell a simple story with my students, and then write a retell of the day's input. A lot of people are calling this write and discuss. Yeah, I write on my computer, and my students are reading it with me, and I'm asking questions, or sometimes I have them copy down what I'm reading or what I'm writing. Oops. All right, and sample of a 90-minute period, TPR actions, the song. Maybe I'm watching the video in my 90-minute block, listening to the song, doing a close activity. 20 minutes for an embedded reading. If you don't know about embedded readings, they're pretty fantastic. Lori Clark, Michelle Whaley came up with this idea. It's a scaffolded reading for students. So look up embedded readings, and you'll find out lots of information and get good samples of them that people have shared throughout the years. They're wonderful. So maybe I'm doing 2 or 3 versions, maybe a 3rd version, or maybe I always have a 3rd version for the students that finish early, and they can go on and read the 3rd version. Talking about the calendar, again, talk about that later. A game, like a 4 corners game or a cultural activity that I'm providing input with pictures for 15 minutes. Quizlet Live. I do believe in Quizlet Live. I do believe in allowing, putting a Quizlet set together for my students of all the structures that we're doing. They really like Quizlet Live, so maybe we do that on that day. And then write a retell of the day's input, students copy, and then the daily quiz. And I kind of put those together, and because it's a formative assessment. One, having them copy down the work, then I see that they're copying it. I saw that a student was copying everything wrong yesterday, and I had to talk to him. Well, he doesn't have his glasses. So I called home, I talked with him. I mean, these are things that I'm able to see. He's doing fine on all my quizzes because they're oral, or he can read the paper, but he can't see my screen. So talking about TPR actions and gestures. So our TPR actions and gestures, this is just a classic TPR model. And I got a lot of this over the years from all different people, but this tic-tac-toe box, Terry Wiekert gave me this great idea, and I love using it. You can take any 3 words and fit them into this tic-tac-toe chart. The only ones has, and has are all the same, but everything else, any other way you read it, has, runs, wants, runs, has, wants, runs, wants, has, wants. Any way you read it, it's going to give you variety for your students. So often, we're like, well, we keep doing it the same way, or my students keep thinking I'm saying it the same way. This is one way not to do that. So classic TPR, you say the word and you model it, and the students do the gesture. You say and you do not model it when they're ready. You're watching for them. You can say 2 in a row and have them do the actions. You can say it with their eye. You say it and their eyes are closed so that you're able to get, it's a nice formative assessment. You can see, okay, this one is getting it, this one's not getting it. You could say 3 in a row, and that's where this chart works perfectly. And then you could start to add details, or you can start to make word pairs or add prepositional phrases. Runs like a famous person. So those are perfect. One thing I want to say about TPR, you must sell it and make it believable. If you sell it, your kids are going to enjoy it. It's going to be a good experience. I'm not saying it has to be done every day. And I'm also not saying it just needs to be done for your novices, because it's great to also do this for your intermediates. I use it at different parts all year. Sometimes I forget about it, and I make myself little notes now to say, hey, 3rd quarter, don't forget about TPR, because you can pre-teach a lot of vocabulary that way. Different verbs in different tenses. I do this with the subjunctive. I do this with different types of commands. It works really well for all students. And the kinesthetic connections are amazing. So telling simple stories. Stories can only have 5 to 6 sentences. And I need everyone to hear that, because I think it's critical that we remember 5 to 6 sentences, even up to 7. Keep it simple. They don't have to be stories that go on for 2 weeks. Of course, you make them simple only by using language your students know. And today I'm going to give you 3 simple story frames. These are all available at GaryDiBianca.com in the resource section. So you can download these, as well as all the example stories I'm going to give you today. So number 1, there's no problem. You just say, like, there's a character, maybe there's a feeling. If you're not ready for your feelings, don't do feelings yet. My students in level 1, it's week 4, ending week 4, we're not ready for feelings yet. I'll add feelings like in 2 weeks when I want to. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just not doing it. The character does something, that's all. And then they do 2 or 3 other things. It is simple. It's a beautiful transition from TPR. If I'm teaching them other words like out of context, now I'm going to put them in a context. No problem. Number 2, kind of traditional. There's a problem. There's a character, has the problem, and tries to solve it in 3 different places, or 3 different activities he does, or 3 different tries. Maybe he resolves it. Maybe he doesn't. Sometimes I get to number 2 and the bell rings and I don't ever finish the story, and that's okay. Number 3, it's similar to 2, but you always would want something, look for something, need something. You have your character, maybe the feeling, oh, they're sad because they need something. And then they go to get or they find. It's just a simple play, but I want you to think about all the high frequency words and verbs that fit right into this. Even prefers something, likes something, doesn't like something. I mean, thinking about the highest frequency verbs that we have in all of our languages. Simple story sample 1. The words I have in red are just always in my room. Like, there's always a sign for there is or there are, is and are, and there's more that I have up. But again, I'm gradually putting them up, especially for my novices. Here's a simple story. There is a guy. The guy walks to a cat. That's easy to show. If I have a guy in the room, student, and then a cat, right? I have stuffed animals of cats. The guy touches a cat. The cat screams. The guy screams and walks quickly. So what needed to be pre-taught? Touches, screams, and walks. So those could be your 3 structures for the class lesson, or this is just a great reuse and recycle of words that we've already learned throughout the year through good TPR. When you're thinking about the TPR, there's lots of TPR high frequency lists that you can look up online that's going to help you figure out some words that you want to be teaching. Simple story 2. Pre-teach: sings, cries, runs. So there is a girl and her dad. The dad sings to his kid. It could be his child. You can use any word there. If you want to say daughter, I'm trying to keep it simple. The dad sings, or excuse me, the girl sings to her dad. That's number 1. The dad cries a little bit. The girl does not cry. She runs. Oh, I think it's kind of sweet. Let's show a nice relationship, although she does run away from her dad. Simple story, sample 3. This is a problem one. Pre-teach: runs, sees, and jumps. There is a cat. The cat is bored. The cat sees a dog. Now, I haven't specifically said there's a problem, but we could infer that there's a problem because of cats and dogs maybe not getting along. And you could build this up in your class, but if you want to teach is afraid of, you go right ahead. I'm just trying to show you how I can keep this simple. The cat runs. The dog runs too. The word "to" is always on my wall. The cat runs from the dog. The word "from" is on my wall. The cat jumps on the dog. On is on my wall. The dog runs. A simple story. Now, you tell this story, and how do I still make this 10 minutes? Well, I'm adding gestures. I'm adding questioning. If you've learned about questioning and asking questions and encircling questions and all of that fun that we do because we know we can build more language, you ask questions. But what I find is so many of my students cannot listen to me do this for 15 or 20 minutes, but they can for 10 minutes as I'm building this up. So I ask them some questions about each one. And you saw how I built a lesson. You saw how I built a day. That's a part of it. This is a cultural story frame. So it's a little bit more intense, but I can still see doing this with novices. I've written this one in the past tense. Pre-teach needed to go to the first floor, looked for blank in the building, did not find or found. Okay, past tense of find. So our character. In Cuba, the US American student had a problem with her tooth. This is a needs. She needed to go to the first floor to find a dentist. In the building, she looked for the dentist on the first floor, but she did not find the dentist. That's like a 3. A 2. She found a map and there was a 0 on the map. She was on the 0 floor. She was confused. She found stairs and went to the first floor. Thank God. She finally found the real first floor and the dentist. After, when she went to pay, she was confused that the bill was only 10 Cuban dollars. Why was she confused? And I would build in a cultural lesson here. For target language Spanish people, teachers, sorry about that. You have your difference of floors, the 0 floor versus the first floor. You also have, when I'm talking about 10 Cuban dollars here, we can talk about how healthcare is cheaper even for tourists in Cuba, or maybe the student is studying there. It's only going to cost $10 to fix her tooth instead of the amount of money it would cost in the United States. So I'm able to do some good cultural comparisons here. You follow up with the simple story with reading. Follow up with a write the retell of the day or the write and discuss, or you have a story for them. One thing I love with the write and discuss is I'm still asking questions, or even with the reading, I'm still asking questions. So when that bell dings me or my timer says, all right, you're out of time, senor, 10 minutes, maybe I ask them for I say 30 seconds more. I'm still going to get great comprehensible input and questioning in my reading. The beauty of this is you'll have a test bank, you'll have a bank of reading options from class to class, from year to year, every time you write one of those stories. So I just love having those for homework assignments, for tests, for everything. All right. The reading also helps you reuse language. So this section is about reusing language. You have to be intentional. You must reuse your structures in many contexts throughout the year. As your students acquired, as your students are, you take their acquired structures and they're developing them, your stories can develop more. But I want you to be careful and not do it too much. You need to know your stories can still be simple. And sometimes, especially with our novices, that's all they can handle. Hopefully you are building their stamina, but when you're teaching a class of 25 to 30 kids, are you building everyone's stamina? You have to remember also your students are all acquiring language at different rates. So you find the best balance to reach all students, and you don't just teach to the top performing students. You have to teach to the middle students. Teaching proficiency and teaching for mastery. Hopefully you're doing this like for mastery by the end of the semester or end of the year. So there's great power in reusing and recycling your language structures. So talking about the calendar, I'm able to reuse a lot of language here. Over time, students can acquire the following if you intentionally talk about these aspects. Days of the week, telling the date, the months, expressing birthdays, numbers, stating on a certain day this happens or this happened, weather, time, talking about their weekends, national and international holidays and celebrations, school events that are occurring like dances, the wins and losses of sporting events, your teams from your city, teams, all of my students' sporting events, classes and schedules, national days of. This has been one that I've started this year and I love it. I'm going to show you an example in a moment, but I looked up one of the national days of calendars or the international days of calendars. It's just online, just do a search for it. And I did some pre-planning of this, and I'll show you that in a moment. Time frame words, and plus much more. I know you are even doing more with this. Calendar talk or talking about the calendar. Look at how much we can embellish that experience. But again, still keeping it with that timer, because sometimes we get so excited about it as teachers. I'm like, whoa, this is taking half of my period. I don't really want it to take half of my period. It could take half of yours. I am not here telling you like that it is wrong. I'm just saying you keep it simple also. So this year I've started this. This is just a table, and I went through and actually I fill in the top, the days with the students. I fill in the month with the students. I already had these, and you start to see what you need. So I needed yesterday, I needed today, I needed tomorrow. So I've written those in. I needed there is, and I wanted it right on my screen. Then I have all of the days in numerals, but then I'm typing them in every day with the students. These are the various days I was talking about. Well, on the 5th, it was cheese pizza day. The 7th was the beard day. The teddy bear day was on Monday, the 9th. Okay, and of course, our kind of national day was the Day of the Patriot, or the Day of Memory. So what I did was I went through those national day calendars and I typed in these certain days and I just covered them up. Now I don't do this in slideshow mode, but I just have this on my screen and I'm able to remove these. So on the day, I am surprised. It's like, oh, when I came in the next morning, I just copied this 5 times for my 5 different classes. This tells me it's first period. The first day, I also asked them whose birthdays. So it's Lily's birthday on the 28th, Morgan's birthday on the 24th, and I added those so I don't forget their birthdays. The students were excited. They told me that the video game 2K20 came out on the 6th. I had no knowledge of that. Okay. During class, I often will type if they have their games, like, okay, volleyball today, football, and I would type that here so that I don't forget to talk about it the next one. I didn't do that on this one, but there you go. So this has been a wonderful way for me to talk about the calendar with my students, and I've been doing it in all of my levels. So keeping things novel, reusing our language, we need to use it in different contexts. So songs, and I told you I love songs. I find songs with old and new language. Those are words that I could focus on. Maybe when I'm doing a cloze activity or a fill in the blank, I remove the language that they know, that they'll be able to hear when they're listening for certain words. Video clips, if you talk about, you narrate your videos, kids really enjoy that. Silly videos, but I'm always looking for those in order to reuse language and then also for some new language. Look for pictures to do a picture talk. You can narrate it. You could talk about what happened before and what will happen after using your language structures. Think about fairy tales that because those are really common for most of our students. I love using Cinderella. I love using the Three Pigs. These are stories that I go to all of the time because they're successful in class. The students can relate to them. Legends, fables, or other well-known stories that you can tell, you're able to really take advantage of them with a common story that they know. Again, they don't always have to be common. I love using legends also from various countries. Read simple biographies. I'll kind of talk about this, but students can even write these. Sometimes I have my four students write them for my lower levels, just using the highest frequency verbs they know. So, the name is, blank is from, blank lives in, likes to do this, is a blank profession, has maybe these accomplishments, always wanted to do this, but still hasn't. Those biographies can be constructed and then read by your students. And we're able to really incorporate a lot. I'm doing this for Hispanic Heritage Month, for example, which is coming up, is a great way to bring in various people's lives to celebrate them in our classes, as well as all year round. And of course, always talk about your students to keep things novel. Games, allow students to play games using cumulative list of old and new language. Quizlet Live, that's free. GimKit costs money. If you haven't checked it out, it's really an awesome program. You get 5 free games when you log on for the first time. But I think it's well worth it. And it's so nice because you can just import your Quizlet sets right into that. Kahoot. Kahoot is great. The kids love it. I always tell my students, well, you have to realize it takes me time to make a Kahoot. Yeah, I cut and paste some other people's. That's a wonderful thing. We can share Kahoots. But I don't do as many Kahoots with students because it takes me a lot of time to make them, and I would use a lot more Quizlet. Games from, for example, Nuestra Historia or Voces Digital. If you use the Nuestra Historia curriculum or Voces, they have great games that your students could be playing also. Moving forward, let's talk about reading. So personally, I am overcomplicating reading instruction and assessment in the world language classroom. We can do it, please know that. And I do it too. But so often I overcomplicate it, and I try to make these wonderful reading assessments and projects with kids, and it's just too much. It's not necessary. I could stay simple, do it simply, and we're all okay. So my goal for novices is honestly, tell me in English what it means. Yep, tell me what it means. Let's work around it. Yeah, you want them to start to pick up some of the syntax in your target language, and they do, but they can clearly tell me in English. My goal for my intermediates is different, of course. I want them to figure out what something means. I do want to give them more language they don't understand. I want them to delve deeper to make connections. If you're preparing students for the AP exam, AP language and culture exam, they need to know about all the different multiple choice questions. So you could check that out. You know, the new binder came out, the new world language binder, to see all the different types of questions that AP is currently asking on those exams, as well as taking a look at Nuestra Historia's AP book that just came out, which is fantastic. I am a little biased because I'm one of the contributing authors, but check that out if you have an AP program, because I don't know, it's really everything I've always wanted and been waiting for. So I now have it. So I don't know what I need next, you know, what can I still complain about? But I have that resource now and I'm thrilled. So let's more about reading for novices. You know, some ideas. Read together and give English meaning. Read with a partner and together figure out the meaning. Teacher, I still ask questions about the text. Draw sections from the text. True or false questions in English, or any other activities that encourage rereading. This is going to be a goal of mine. This summer, I've seen some wonderful presentations that teachers are using to get their students to reread something. It's fantastic. I can't wait to be doing it. But I do know that these other skills that I just talked about, or these other ways of reading, also work. Intermediates, you know, all those novice strategies I still use. Ask students, have the students ask questions about the task. You know, read more authentic pieces with your intermediates. Higher order multiple choice questions, again, like that are in Nuestra Historia 3-4 AP. And again, for the AP type questions, see the 11 to 15 different types of questions that are available in that binder. Reading for fluency. I talk about this a lot. I do believe in reading like authentic things, but I believe in reading for fluency. I know I'm helping my students acquire language by having them read. It's a fundamental piece of teaching with comprehensible input. So I love using comprehension-based novels. You know, so readers that are written with repetitive and controlled vocabulary, they often have a unique word count. Grammar is not sheltered as long as it is comprehensible. Cognates are used. They usually have full glossaries, which is fantastic for our students. And most often they're compelling, interesting stories. So what I've put together here, and again, this is available at my website, GaryDiBianca.com/resources. So let's try to keep teaching a novel simple, especially if you're doing it for the first time. So for the first time, you know, find an appropriate novel. Make sure it's appropriate for your students. You should read the novel. You can read it for some topics. You can pull structures. I go through and I highlight all the language I know my students wouldn't know. I do some categorizing. And I think, you know, I do backwards plan. All right, I'll start teaching this in January, and we're going to read the novel in March. So in January, I start teaching certain language structures. So that's the pre-teaching of it. Sometimes I know people that do it, they pre-teach before a chapter. I tend to read a novel in like 2 to 3 weeks. So you need to decide how long you want to read that novel. Year 2, this is when I think you should go all out if you want to. Hey, everyone, I don't always go all out. I do this year 1 plan that I'm going to show you next, like all the time. Decide how you will activate prior knowledge. Okay, so once you teach something the first time, you start getting better at that. You decide, you get a sense of when you need to introduce certain characters and settings, events, and topics. You come up with some personal and global questions per chapter. I like doing that, for example, in my level 4 classes. I need them to be thinking globally. So I make those questions and I have students working on them or we talk about them in class. Then you start to think about some of your different question areas. You know, when does it need to be comprehension based? When is it cultural? When are higher order or critical thinking skills coming in? All right, again, I don't want you to feel like this when you're reading a novel. I want you to feel like this, that you can do it. So here is my plan. So it's really easy for you to take a picture of this or go to the website because it's there for you. You know, this is just 10 chapters. All right. And again, you may have more chapters, you may have fewer. So group read. Yeah, we read in choral translation. We do. We read together. I put it on a screen, or everyone has their book. And everyone has their book, and then we're looking at it and we're going through it. Chapter 2, we do that again, but I start to ask questions in the target language. Chapter 3, pair reading, like, or a volleyball reading. They read a sentence in the target language only if they're ready, and the other student gives the meaning and reads the next sentence. Reader's theater. So I put it in chapter 4 here, but please, you're going to put this in the chapter that is the most exciting chapter with awesome events. You move that one wherever. I have the students, I read it with the students, and we act it out together. Group read, again, but I only do certain words at that point, like certain words that I'm checking with pop-up grammar. That's where I start to teach various structure, and I do some of that pop-up grammar. Chapter 6, a smash doodle summary. You can look up smash doodles. Martina Bex has a great explanation of it, and I know other people do too. Check that out. Individual game for chapter 7, like a true or false marker grabbing game. Fantastic. It works wonders with our students. So maybe they're individually reading chapters 6 and 7, and then I'm checking, I'm assessing through doing smash doodles, talking about the chapter after, as well as doing follow-up true and false game. Circle group read. I really like this one. We get in a circle. I read in the target language. I then say, okay, you're next. Tell me what I said. Then I read a little bit more. I control how much I read. So I see who the next student is. So I have a good sense of where I stop and how much I know that student can handle. Chapter 9, more reading together, making predictions. And then chapter 10, I need you to see that it could be as simple as this. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, and you don't have to do every awesome idea you read online. Assessing. I have 5 simple assessments to make sure that you're assessing for success. I need them to be successful so they stay with me and I don't lose them. If you're teaching for acquisition, make sure you're assessing for what they have acquired, and you're not just pulling out the old textbook assessments and only focused on those. Here are 5 simple go-to assessments for my last couple minutes here. 1, you are assessing the acquired, sometimes learned language structures. This is just the translation quiz. I say a word chunk or a sentence, and they tell me what it means. Again, I have said I believe in keeping a Quizlet set. I have an ongoing Quizlet set per class or even per level, and then this really helps my students that may be absent. Simple listening. There is a whole blog post on my site about this, but I'm going to go through it quickly. I love Quizlet. So I go to the test function on Quizlet. I print out the multiple choice ones. It then provides me with 4 options. It actually has a question. So right up here, there would be a target language. This would say toca or touches in Spanish. I cut that out, or I white it out, and I use the ABCD that's already done for me. I cut those out quickly and I put them on a sheet, or sometimes I can just use the sheet that it's printed out for me. I say a sentence in the target language using one of these structures, and there you go. They just tell me which one I'm talking about. It's a simple target language listening interpretive. So my example here, the man sings all night long during the concert. That's the sentence I would say in the target language, and they choose the correct English word that is here that I was talking about. Super simple listening. I love a dictation, right? So the dictation, they're learning from their errors, and I do consider this an assessment. So I say a sentence. The student writes the sentence that I say in the target language, and I do about 8 to 12 of these. Sometimes it's a story. Sometimes it's just random sentences. They write their sentence here. Oh, there is a cat. I tell them to skip 2 lines, and then we go on to sentence 3. Then, at the end, I show them the correct sentences. The student corrects all of their errors. Their cat. They rewrite the words on the second line. I grade these really quickly by scanning over. Do I still see mistakes? I take off points if I still see mistakes. They needed to copy that correctly. Again, you are thinking through your students. If you have students with various learning issues that can't do it as well, you need to think about it. But I tell you, almost all of my students have had success with these, and they're learning spelling from them and other aspects of language. Number 4, simple story retells. They talk about the story that you were doing in class, or they write about the story. This is presentational communication. It mirrors what we've done in class. It helps me do my standards because this is presentational communication. And my novices can do this also. When I'm doing it with novices, I grade liberally. I mean, want them to have success. And my intermediate lows also. You know, again, it just depends. My kids come from different environments. They come from different schools. So I have to, you know, help them find success early on. And then I continue to push them toward more development of their thoughts, development of their sentences. Here is a rubric that encourages development. You can get this on my site. You know, it looks at task. It looks at development of message, complete in more complex sentences to some sentences and clauses, and then language. You know, accurately uses language versus, you know, not so much, and then rarely, but they can still have errors. If you saw, you know, I'm an AP reader, and I have an article that I wrote earlier this summer on the Teacher's Discovery blog about AP language and culture and using comprehensible input. So if you're an AP teacher, check that out. But we need to have our students build their capacity for development. And a rubric like this works super well for my students because I am going to be giving them the 5 points because they're doing most of these. They have to extend themselves and exceed my expectations. And so many of my students do that. And it's the push they need to develop more. 5th is just the good old timed writings that so many of us do in CI classrooms. The students write for a set time and count the words. I always do 10 minutes. Sometimes I do 12. They should only use words that they know. You know, I have students record their numbers, like how many words they do. They calculate their growth. I grade them often on just an average word count for that week. You know, anywhere like points, 20 points, 19 points. One thing I'm big on like the 59% and above grading. Unless they do absolutely 0, they're going to at least get a 50% or above in my class. I push my students to add details and develop their thoughts through the timed writings also. Ooh, I see there's not been many questions. I have made it. Thank you so much. I hope you've seen that, you know, keeping CI simple for students is benefiting them. It's helping them build their stamina, and it's helping you. So often, I'm not able to stay and to keep myself entertained enough in watching some of my students being bored. If I'm doing something for 20 minutes or for a half hour, you don't have to feel like that. So that's what I want, the message I wanted to share. You know, continue training yourself and your students with your expectations, chunk your language, time your lessons, reuse language all the time, read language, and those were some ideas to keep it simple, and then assessing simply. So thank you so much. Again, GaryDiBianca.com. You could check that out for more resources. Have a great school year, and I hope to see you at some conferences this year. Take care. Bye-bye.